What's up, everybody, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today DFS. My name is Nejad. I'm with Meg Shoup at Meg08DFS. Always a good follow, Meg. We're getting closer. We're 14 days away from week one, or I should say from NFL kickoff, because we got that Thursday slate, that showdown slate. We've got a Friday game, but then we have the Sunday slate, which we're 17 days away from. How are you today?
I'm doing great because I cannot believe the countdown is officially down to 2 weeks. I am so excited. You know me, I'm an NFL girl, 365 year round. So this is so exciting for me to be just 2 weeks away and be talking real NFL DFS talk with you again. That makes me really happy too.
Yeah, you mentioned how 365 for you because you do a lot of best ball. Well, we'll
Right.
pepper in. I mean, a lot of this is like overlap, right? We're going to talk about, we're not going to talk about the whole week one slate. We're going to talk about some week one players that we like and things of that nature. But this show is really kind of more of a stock up, stock down show. Players that are like maybe popping for us. We're going to get into more of like the week one slate, like our favorite stacks and our favorite games as we get closer to the NFL season. And I do have a bit of an announcement before we start talking about some QBs that are maybe popping off the page to us a little bit, or whether it's week one or just early in the season. The announcement is this: if you're watching us right now, like Japan is in the chat. Thank you for being in here, Japan. Hit the like button if you could. Appreciate you. The announcement is this: we used to do our game by game preview. It was me and Mike McClure at 11 o'clock on Fridays. A good time to do the show, but a little later in the week. Well, here's what we're doing, Meg. We're doing me and Mike McClure on Thursdays at 11, but we're adding you to that mix. So our game-by-game preview, which is very comprehensive. We go game by game. Mike McClure has his model. He has his simulations. He has his favorite stacks. All of that stuff, all of that info, and all of Meg's info, and all of my info. It's all every single Thursday at 11 o'clock. We'll be here for you. Meg, you got to be excited about that because last year during the playoffs, it was the three of us. And I got to be honest with you, I absolutely loved those shows more than any of the shows we've ever done on FFT DFS. How you feeling?
Well, that makes me feel good to hear, but I felt the exact same way. I, of course, loved doing the early look shows with you, but I think it's going to be really fun, the three of us on Thursdays when we have more information to break down game by game and go through who we're fading, who we're stacking, who we're liking, and really talk through it together, the three of us. Because, during the playoffs last year, I had a blast talking with you and Mike, and I think those were really good shows for the postseason, and I look forward to running that back starting week one this year.
And I think what you'll find with this show is that when it's the three of us, it's such different perspectives where, Mike's coming from his, not the model approach, his model approach, right? And his simulations. And you've got your best ball background with the DFS. You've got me with more of like the hand building approach and that type of thing. So I think, and for the record, there's just so many contrarian plays on here, largely because of Mike McClure, because of what his simulations tell him. So on this show, you're just not going to get what you get on most of the other shows. That's not a criticism for the other shows, but my point is you hear a lot of the same players. Of course, you'll hear some of those same players on this show, but I think you'll hear some different players and constructions, ways to construct your lineup with respect to, the double tight ends and whether we're going up at running back or down at running back from a pricing standpoint, paying up for receiver, paying down. I think you'll hear a little bit of difference in our show than you do some of the others. So hopefully, and there's so many people in the chat. I thank you all so much. Greg Goose Hayes, Scott, the Wisconsin, Florida project guy. I'll remember everybody from last year just jumping in here. Another Jewish Sharp, Josh Lucero, Jay Metz. Really appreciate you being in here. Let's talk some actual shop here, Meg.
Sure. I love
it. What I thought this show could be, because we did a week one sort of pricing thing with Debro about a week and a half ago. Right. It was a great show. I encourage everybody to watch it because there was some really good knowledge dropped there, and it applies to week one and the beginning of the season. I don't want to be that comprehensive here in terms of covering every quarterback we like and every running back and wide receiver and whatnot. My thought is let's talk about some guys that are just popping off the page to us, whether it be week one or whether it be in early in the season. And I want to start with the rookie QBs who, frankly, we may not be playing week one. But I think when we talk about Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams and Bo Nix, the starter for the Denver Broncos, and Drake May, who in a short period of time looked pretty good behind Jacoby Brissett in week two of his preseason game, I think we're looking at some guys who actually have some fantasy potential DFS wise in the beginning of the season, maybe not week one, although Jayden Daniels plays Tampa. You could play the afternoon slate. Maybe you want to play a $5,700 Jayden Daniels. Caleb he's home against the Titans. Bo Nix at Seattle. Like certainly contrarian plays, but of all of we'll get into the quarterbacks we actually like for the slate in a second. But of all the rookie quarterbacks, which one for you are you finding yourself in the best ball streets gravitating to? And which one do you think is going to have an impact early in the DFS season?
I think I'm a known rookie skeptic. And obviously that didn't work with Stroud last year, but he came on a little bit, obviously more middle of the season really came on. But so early in the season, I don't see myself really gravitating to these rookies. And one thing that best ball, you get a read on the market, right? You can definitely see what the market is very interested in, higher or lower, kind of like we're talking stock up, stock down, who the market is interested in. And I think the market is going to gravitate to some of these rookies. So it'll be interesting to see where ownership comes in on. But if ownership comes high on these rookies, I could see myself kind of fading all the rookies because I just like a lot of the other quarterbacks in different spots. If I had to choose one rookie that I'm confident that's going to start the season the hottest, it's Caleb Williams. He's the most dynamic quarterback. Obviously was the first pick for a reason. The Bears have set him up with success. He's surrounded by talent. He's a good offensive line. He's surrounded by weapons. Obviously, they did right by Caleb Williams to set him up for success. I don't know that I could say the same thing for the other rookies. And as we see in Washington, I think they're going to have to do a very creative type offense to get the ball out quick to mitigate the bad offensive line. Mm-hmm. It looks like Cliff Kingsbury. I know people would joke about the horizontal air raid. I think that's going to be back. I think it's going to be a lot of quick passes, a lot of, I don't know that we're going to see a ton. Like I know the first preseason game we saw Daniels check into a play and take a deep shot. We might see a couple of those, but from the second preseason game, it really looked like a lot of that Cliff Kingsbury horizontal air raid, get the ball out quick. So, you're really counting on Jayden Daniels to break off those long runs, which we know he can absolutely do. But for all these reasons, Caleb Williams is going to be the rookie that I probably gravitate to the most early and possibly week one. But honestly, teaser week one, I probably won't be on the rookies because I could see the public being very interested in the rookies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there'll be enough interest in the rookies where it'll be an appreciable interest where we're like, 5% went on, Caleb Williams or Jayden Daniels. I'll make the argument for Jayden Daniels here.
Sure.
And I'm loving some of the comments, which of course I'm going to read once we get through some of this. The argument for Jayden Daniels is as follows. Okay, first of all, I said it with Debro last week. I think he's better than Caleb Williams. But that doesn't really matter for purposes of fantasy, right? Because what's the situation? What's the offensive line and the weapons look like, right? Yeah. So with all that said, I think Jayden's going to pick up more yards with his legs. As questionable as the offensive line is, we've seen it before with RG3, for example, where especially in year one, if you're buying time with your legs, not because you're running north-south, but if you're buying time with your legs and you're not getting hit or injured, like you can create plays with the extra second or two that you buy that time with behind a weak offensive line. But here's the biggest argument for Jayden Daniels. I'm not necessarily saying playing him week one, but when that afternoon slate comes out, I am going to take a look at it because there's 4 games. Sure. They all have relatively low totals. They're in that 42, 43-point range. And I think you can kind of like take a grab bag of quarterbacks to like among those 4. But the defense is bad. Like this secondary, I just don't think it. Like I hope they're not bad. We're Washington fans, right? Like I hope they're not terrible. But there's a good chance that we are in trailing position with Jayden Daniels much more than we are with Caleb Williams, because I think the Bears defense is actually pretty decent. And I think whatever, you can make the argument that certainly it's better than Washington's defense. So I think we could see a situation where Jayden Daniels just finds himself trailing and throwing the game script. And, I think they're going to run off plays, from a pace standpoint, a little bit faster with Kingsbury. So that would be the argument. I mean, as far as like Bo Nix and Drake May, that's kind of a shelf, put it on the shelf conversation. It's not really interesting from a fantasy standpoint. But I will say this, like Caleb and Jayden Daniels, I think if they start off early in terms of like playing how people think they're going to play, I think from a DFS standpoint, weeks 2, weeks 3, let me just tell you this, Meg, week 2, this, Washington hosts the New York Giants. Are you telling me that if Jayden Daniels looks anywhere close to decent at Tampa week 1, that people aren't going to be on Jayden Daniels? Like, I think that's a really, really interesting situation depending on what we see week 1. So just something to think about. But let me ask you this. In terms of week 1, and again, we have time to modify these opinions, right? We're a little over 2 weeks out from the main slate. But who are the quarterbacks that you have your eye on for week one? Like maybe one or two or three that you're like, I'm not going to pass that value up.
Yeah, I mentioned you and I were talking a little pre-show, and a couple that I like, and I'm just going to pull up the pricing just to refer to it. I like two. I want to start early with the Miami offense. So Tua versus Jacksonville is one I've got my eye on. Kyler Murray, I want to be early on that. Buffalo, that could likely be a high total. But Anthony Richardson, I want to be, he's just priced slightly higher than the rookies. And I really, obviously, talking about a rushing upside, he was breaking fantasy last year. He just also was getting injured every game. So if he can protect himself and play a whole game, we know the upside there with Richardson. We've already seen it. And in that Steichen offense, I love Richardson. Now, I do have some lower price ones that I also am very interested in that could be also a little bit lower owned too. And the two that I like the most are Justin Herbert against the Raiders. I think people have overblown this run heavy narrative that, they're just going to be run heavy. They've still got Justin Herbert. He's still a top elite quarterback in this league. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to know how to use him. I also think people are going to be skeptical coming off, and I can't pronounce a medical term, plantar fascia. Not a doctor. You can put that under my but
Meg Shoup, not a doctor.
Not a doctor, but can't pronounce the words. But I think people are going to be skeptical about that as well. So when people get nervous, get greedy, and I'm going to scoop up some Justin Herbert stacks week one because. Listen, I just think in a Jim Harbaugh offense, I'm going to lean into that and not worry about the whole run heavy thing. And like that against the Raiders. Final one is you just mentioned the matchup for Jayden Daniels week 2 against the Giants. Week 1, the Vikings play the Giants. And I know from being in the best ball streets that people are grossed out by Sam Darnold. They don't buy it. They don't believe it. I have gone on record all draft season. I was drafting him before the JJ McCarthy news in that I think that there's potential for him to have a Geno Baker, Ryan Tannehill-like resurgence. This is the best head coach and play caller he's ever played for. He's playing with the best receiver in the league, the best weapons he's ever played around. No guarantees here, but he has a chance to actually put himself back on the map as a starting quarterback. And why not do it week 1 against one of the worst secondaries in the league in the New York Giants? I think people are going to be grossed out by him still. They have been not into it all, let me tell you, in the best ball streets. So I think that's going to, usually that carries over into the early weeks of DFS. And I'm going to try to be early and often to that and just Darnold, Justin Jefferson. Why not? You get a cheap quarterback with the best receiver in the league against a good defense to target.
Yeah, I like all of those plays, frankly. And I think the Sam Darnold note is really interesting. If not for week 1, just in general, like I honestly, what if he crashes and burns week 1, which is not super likely against the Giants, but I think that would not only depress his stock, which isn't very high anyway, but potentially depress Justin Jefferson's stock. And what we know about Sam Darnold, he's willing to sling it. He can turn the ball over. But guess what? That's actually not bad, right? Like that's a good thing, especially for receivers, but it's not necessarily bad for quarterbacks. You lose those 2 points, but now you're in negative game script mode the rest of the game in most scenarios where you've got a quarterback that's turning the ball over. So something I think the Sam Darnold take is really interesting. I'll tell you, I like Kyler a lot.
Yes,
I really want to be early on Kyler. I love his price week 1 at 6,400. I love that this Bills defense their secondary is gone. Not that their secondary was great in the first place. A lot of guys were injured, but they're gone. It's a whole new secondary. Matt Milano's injured now. I think Trey McBride is in play. I think, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe some of those lower tier guys, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. These are things we're going to talk about as we approach the season. But love Kyler. I really like Anthony Richardson, although I'm willing to play Jonathan Taylor just as much, if not more, because I think the game plan will be to bludgeon the Texans like the Ravens did in the playoffs last year very successfully. So I could see myself with like a Kyler stack, maybe with the Trey McBride and Jonathan Taylor, and that's kind of some of my core of my lineup. Other than that, I think Trevor Lawrence is interesting. I'm not much of a Trevor guy, but I think he's interesting with maybe a Christian Kirk, and you run it back with Tyreek Hill. Again, these are things we'll talk about. Brad Betts, Meg says, see, I'd love to watch. This is interesting because you and I were just talking about this. He said, see, I'd love to watch you make a fantasy football draft and talk through why you made the selection. He thinks that would be TV gold. Well, Meg, You and I were literally just texting about that.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll
if you want to make it happen, we can make it happen.
Exactly. So I got to look at my schedule, but Brad, that's a great idea. And it's something we've been talking about. And I appreciate the suggestion. Let's see. Scott, the Wisconsin Florida Project guy, says, I just started playing best ball for the first time and started following Megan on Twitter and downloaded her rankings the other day. I also follow Sia on Twitter. First of all,
I love to hear that.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Thank you.
And Meg, what some people don't know, and we'll get to running backs that are popping for us in a second, but what some people don't know is that you're like really a part of this CBS Sports brand now. Like you are not only putting out content on the stuff that you already had, which, you know, you can tell everybody about, but you're putting stuff on CBS Sports, on Sportsline. You've got rankings, you update the rankings, you've got articles, like really, and I've read them. Like this is really, really good information. And I just want to make sure, like people that are just coming in for the first time this year, please understand that Meg's material is everywhere out there, including on Sportsline and CBSSports.com. So please take a look at it. And I appreciate the follows from everybody. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast as well. And give us a 5-star review if you can. All right, we're going to get to some running backs again. We're just touching on some subjects here. This isn't a super comprehensive show because that's going to happen as we approach NFL season. Of course, Mike McClure is going to start to join us for that as well when we get to the game-by-game previews. Let's hear a message from our partners before we talk RBs.
Well, you need your sports news anywhere?
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
We're back on Fantasy Football Today, DFS. Meg, I want to talk about some running backs that are kind of popping for me a little bit. And when I say popping for me, like some of these are not going to be obvious plays. Again, this is kind of a stock up, stock down. We'll touch on a couple stock downs at the end of the show, but there's a lot of value in the 5K range. Ramondre Stevenson was one that Derek Brown brought up that I thought was a really sharp play. He's in the upper 5K range. I'm starting to think, and this is probably going to be somewhat contrarian, I don't think people want to jump all over Devin Singletary, but I mean, he's the only guy in the New York Giants backfield. He's 5,700 week one. I just think guys like that are going to get such a big workload, even if their talent and their team isn't as high as, let's say, a Jonathan Taylor, or just name a Christian McCaffrey. There's so few backs that get the workload, a 3-down workload, which I'm expecting. I could be wrong. I'm expecting Devin Singletary to get. Those are some of the guys I like. I think we talked about Rico Dowdle at 4,600. That's a guy that I think is interesting just because he's super low priced. I love Isaiah Pacheco this year. I'm drafting him in my redraft leagues, and I just like him on this Kansas City offense. I think Najee Harris is interesting because obviously Jaylen Warren has the soft tissue injury, which those aren't great. Like you really have to rest those. And so I don't expect Jaylen Warren week one. I'm not sure I expect him week two. Like we'll see what happens. And we obviously have a potential reoccurrence of that injury. Najee Harris behind a revamped offensive line at Atlanta week one. I don't love it, but if we're looking for volume, I mean, Najee's going to have it. So any running backs that are from a stock up, stock down standpoint or week one standpoint, or maybe something you're seeing in best ball that are jumping out to you.
Well, an expensive one is Bijan Robinson,
yes,
obviously going against the Steelers in that same game with Najee. He's my stock up all season. I've just been very interested in it, and he goes early in best ball drafts in round one. He's one that I'd be willing to pay up for. But I like a lot of the guys you mentioned in that sub 6K range or right around 6K. You've got James Conner at 6.2, Ken Walker at 6.1. You mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. I like that. Maybe Tony Pollard against Chicago. It sounds like that's going to be a 1A, 1B situation with Tajay Spears. I like the Devin Singletary call. I'm really love the Najee Harris with getting a full workload. He's probably my favorite at cost at 5.6K. And then a little further down, I'll mention someone from our Washington Commanders is Brian Robinson is just really cheap. And he looked in that second preseason game to really be, I don't know. I mean, it's like you just see it with your eyes. It's not like I can totally break down the X's and O's here, but he just seemed to be running harder or running faster. He just looked so powerful running the ball. And it was just good to see. He's 5.2K. And yes, you mentioned we could be playing from a negative game script. So that would actually behoove Austin Eckler more than Brian Robinson likely. But, I think that's going to be another 1A, 1B running back room here in Washington. And at 5.2K, I think they're going to try to get him going. And as we know, with the RG3 era, rushing quarterbacks sometimes open up lanes for running backs. So, maybe that starts early and Brian Robinson gets some juice there. So I do like Brian Robinson at only 5.2K.
Yeah, that one's interesting. What's so cool about week one, and it applies to a lesser degree week 2 and week 3, but particularly week 1. And this is where Debro and I probably had the one disagreement. I love how much value you're getting in week 1. And what I love about it isn't the obvious, because everybody sees the value. But what I love about it is the constructions are going to be different because people are appreciating different types of value. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of people are talking, because I've listened to some other content. A lot of people are talking, well, I'm going to pay down for a receiver and pay up at running back because there's so much value at the wide receiver position. I don't hate that argument at all. But guess what? There's a lot. You flip that and you can find value on the opposite end too. And I think it's just such an interesting time to build. You mentioned Kenneth Walker at 6,100 against Denver. I mean, he's the guy in Seattle. It doesn't look like Charbonnet is going to have like a huge impact. I mean, obviously he's going to get touches, but we're talking very much a 1A to 1B situation with Kenneth Walker. Like, I could just go down the board. We talked about Najee Harris. You mentioned Brian Robinson, Bijan a pay up option. I mentioned Jonathan Taylor as a pay up option, Isaiah Pacheco in that middle range. You can do so many different constructions at the running back position. And again, I brought up Devin Singletary, and please understand the context. Stock up, right? Like, I just think nobody's talking about Devin Singletary, and it seems to me like he's going to get all the work. I'm not suggesting that he's a better play than a Ramondre Stevenson, for example, or a Najee Harris or an Isaiah Pacheco. But I think these are the things that are unknown enough for you to appreciate the fact that, like, okay, this guy might not be as bad as you think he is. The situation might not be as bad. Week 1 and week 2 are the times to exploit the narratives that we're all kind of coming in with, that everybody's coming in with, like, I'm going to play this guy, I'm going to play this guy, this offensive line stinks, this defense is great. You find out real quick that some narratives, if not like 50% of them, are just wrong. And it's not because of bad information. Well, sometimes it is. It's just because we just read the information wrong. So it's just something to think about. Any other running backs? I mean, I'm looking at some of the guys on my list. I'm scanning it on. I think Rachaad White is interesting against Washington, but that's more of an afternoon slate play to me, because once that afternoon slate comes out, I'm definitely going to be playing it. You mentioned that Chargers game and Justin Herbert. That's part of that afternoon slate as well. James Cook at 6,900. I think a lot of people are going to say to themselves, well, I need a piece of this Bills game. I don't want to play the Josh Allen stack, although some people will. What I'm going to do, and we talked about this with Debro, is I'm going to take the James Cook part of this, and I'm going to run it back with, you name the player, Trey McBride, or maybe even a Kyler Murray stack or something like that. Any thoughts on James Cook in particular?
Yeah, I'd be fine with James Cook. Another one that I'd probably be interested in, who I'd be a little more interested. I really am honestly more interested in that, like, a sub 6K range. And another one that just stood out to me is a 5.5K Jerome Ford. We know Nick Chubb's not going to play week 1. We don't know when he's going to play or be back playing at a high role with the Browns, but we know it's Jerome Ford, and at 5.5K, I like that. Yes, it's against Dallas defense, but they get him involved in the passing game too. So I have to say, like you said, a couple points to follow up. Number one, the first 2 or 3 weeks, I love being contrarian, because it's kind of like, I don't know, this will age me. It's like that. I remember watching this MTV Diary show, and it was like, you think you know, but you have no idea. And that's what we think we know, but we really have no idea. We don't have the 2024 data that we're working with yet. So make those contrarian stands. Don't be afraid to make those contrarian stands, because that's when I honestly have had the best success in September, when I am not afraid to make contrarian stands. So I 100% agree with that. And I also agree with the whole flipping the build. What I see and love is, and I can see the cases for some high price running backs, but I just see a lot of high price receivers in good spots. So I could see myself really in this 5K range of running backs.
Yeah, and I think it lends itself to, if you're playing multiple lineups, and I don't mean like a max entry. If you're playing like 6 lineups, you could just build differently. You could have a 4-2 or a 3-3 where you're paying up at running back and paying down at receiver, and of course the opposite end of that as well. Some talk about Jay Metz. There was somebody asking, Jay Metz talking about some Eckler. Just so you know, because somebody else was asking about him. He's 6,000. I don't think he's going to get the volume to pay off that price tag. So as much as I like Eckler, I just think he's just a piece of this offense, whereas Brian Robinson, certainly the better value going into week 1, in my opinion. Let's see. We had Japan saying play Khalil Shakir. Let's move to receivers. Let's talk about them, because Shakir is an interesting play. I think, no Gabe Davis on this team anymore. Like, we'll see what Keon Coleman does early. I don't think he's going to have a huge impact early. So I think a lot of people are going to want to play Dalton Kincaid, maybe with Josh Allen, but Khalil Shakir certainly going to pop up as well. A receiver that's popped up to me, and you talk about being contrarian week 1. So I think what people want to do week 1 is to let the Houston Texans wide receiver situation play itself out. What does that actually mean? Because a lot of people will say this, like, I want to wait for more information. I totally get it. Except for the fact that you're not taking advantage of the part of, hey, everybody's waiting for the situation to play out. So maybe you can grab somebody and like really, really just max his potential before everybody else gets on the play. I think Nico Collins is that guy. And when we talk about the Colts, and I think the Colts are going to win that game week 1 at home. And I think there's going to be a lot of ball control, but I could be wrong. And it looks like I'm wrong because this total is like 48-49. It's one of the 3 highest totals on the slate. I'm not even saying Nico with CJ Stroud necessarily, but if I had like a little mini stack with Nico Collins on one end and let's say Jonathan Taylor on the other end, and then I move on to whatever game you love, like the Dolphins game or the Bills Cardinals game, which it happens to be the one I think I like the most. I think Nico Collins is going to be the guy for the Texans in terms of being on the field, getting the most targets. And I think Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs will be there, but I think Nico is going to suck up a lot of the targets. So that's a guy that I think from a stock up standpoint, I think he's being recognized, but I think people are going to want to wait for that situation to play out. Another guy I like, but a lot of people like, so I probably won't be on him week 1, is Malik Neighbors. He's 5,900. By the way, Nico Collins is 7,000. Again, I don't think people are going to get to Nico at 7,000 because of the questions at the receiver position. I think Wan'Dale Robinson is sneaky in that Giants game just because he's 4,100 and we know he can be a target monster. We can talk about other receivers I like, and if you have a receiver you like, Khalil Shakir, Japan, drop it in the chat, or any player that you like. But Meg, how about some receivers that stock up week 1, that type of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of yours. I think Neighbors is an immense talent. It's just in best ball, I've stayed away from him just because Daniel Jones is his quarterback. And so I'm a little nervous to even go there at 5,900 because I actually think he could be popular. Again, if we're talking the best ball streets, he has risen to the middle of the second round. And he's only now going a couple of picks behind Marvin Harrison Jr., who, again, they're both just absolutely elite talents. So not knocking the talent, I'm knocking the quarterback. So I don't know that I'm going to be on Neighbors, and my gut tells me he's going to be popular, but we'll wait and see that. But again, stock up as a player, totally agree. Stock up as a player, as his quarterback is what makes me nervous. As far as other receivers, I like paying up. I kind of tease this, but I really like paying up for the guys that are in absolutely great spots. Justin Jefferson against the Giants. Mike Evans against Washington, Tyreek Hill in another high total game. And then there's a lot in that mid range that I like. I love Calvin Ridley. This has been one of my biggest stands. If you read my best ball content, I'm huge on the Tennessee Titans offense. It might not be the Texans from last year, but I really, really think they're an undervalued offense going into this season, certainly in best ball. And I think they could be early in the season. So I want to be early on them. And so I absolutely love Ridley's price. And then you've got Drake London, a very affordable price now with an actual really good quarterback to get him the ball. And then I don't mind that like Kirk Dell range, but I'm with you. I would probably, of the Texans receivers, go ahead and pay 7,000 for Nico Collins, because I do think while all 3 receivers are going to be interesting in that offense, Nico is going to be the alpha in that offense. So I definitely agree with you on Nico. Like those 3 or 4 like really high price guys, and somehow would love to get some lineups where I work at least 2 of them in there. But I also really like that mid range, like I mentioned, of Ridley, London, Kirk, Dell. So there's a lot to like at the receiver position. I haven't even touched on the cheap ones yet.
Well, what's interesting, and speaking of cheap ones, I did mention Wan'Dale Robinson as maybe like a contrarian play. Maybe you wait on that for week 2, see what happens. because somebody said, I think Donovan said Neighbors is going to out target Robinson 3-1. That could be true, but I just let's not forget that Wan'Dale Robinson in the short area in a PPR format like DraftKings is, FanDuel half PPR. If we get in a negative game script, which I'm not necessarily suggesting, this is like a pick'em game, even if it's not a negative game script, I think Malik Neighbors could get a lot of attention, and we could see Wan'Dale Robinson suck up a ton of targets underneath. So just something to think about. There's plenty of 4K options that we'll talk about, maybe on this show, but certainly on the shows that lead up to the week 1 main slate. Like Gabe Davis is an interesting one. Now in Jacksonville in that Miami Dolphins game. He's a guy that can get beyond the defense. It looks like they're trying to use him. We'll see what actually happens. Trying to use him. They're trying to deploy him in I guess, better ways or more ways than the Bills deployed him. They went out and paid him, so that wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think there's plenty of 4K options that could absolutely explode. Jay Metz likes Tank Dell as well. Ladd McConkey will get massive targets, says Jay Metz. We've talked about that. You've talked about that, Meg. I know you're big on Ladd McConkey. Donovan says Greg Dortch is interesting. Absolutely. I think what I want to figure out with Greg Dortch is, well, there's also Michael Wilson there, right? So we have Trey McBride, who we know is getting a ton of targets. Marvin Harrison, who we know is getting a ton of targets. Who's that third guy? Is it Greg Dortch or is it Michael Wilson? They're both cheap. If you guess right on that, you might be in good shape, especially if you have a pretty heavy Kyler stack. Like if you double stack him with, let's say, McBride or Marvin Harrison, and then you do the Dortch or the Michael Wilson thing and it actually hits, you run it back with whoever, Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, James Cook, however you want to play that. I think that's interesting. Let me ask you about one guy that we haven't talked about, and then we'll move on unless there's some questions about receivers in the chat. Tyreek Hill's a great play. No question about it. And Tyreek Hill, you can game plan and bracket Tyreek Hill all you want. Like he's going to beat you, right? But I could see a stat line where Tyreek Hill has 93 yards and 6 catches, which is, for the record, a pretty great game. Doesn't necessarily pay off that price tag unless you get in the end zone on that stat line. But and Jalen Waddle can have also 6 catches for 55 yards or 58 yards, or name the number. Let's say Waddle has 5 catches for 63 yards, and Tyreek Hill has 6 catches for 93 yards. But Waddle is the end zone target. And we've seen games like that. Waddle's only 6,300.
6,300. Yeah.
Listen, he's not Tyreek Hill, but once you get to the red zone, I think it's kind of anybody's game. We know the variance with touchdowns. So to me, as much as I want to play Tyreek Hill, and I know Mike McClure is going to come on here when we do our game by game preview for the main slate, and he's going to be like, I'm jamming it. I don't know this, but I'm just like, we talked about Tyreek Hill so much last year that I'm pretty sure Tyreek Hill is going to pop in his model. But I just think Jalen Waddle's a very interesting play because he could potentially score just as much, if not outscore, because of potential touchdown equity. And he's 6,300. I just think that's one of those plays that could, going into week 1, that it's not going to surprise anybody, but I just don't think a lot of people are going to do it.
I agree with you. And like I said, there's a lot of plays that I like it. Well, starting with Nico at 7,000, but in the 6Ks and even the 5Ks that some of those guys I mentioned as like kind of mid price guys. So yeah, I think Waddle's a great value. And I think there's honestly a lot of great values on the slate. So I think, like you said, if you're building 5 lineups, maybe you do some different structures, because there's a lot of different ways. And that's what makes especially week 1 so fun, is there's just a lot of different ways you can approach it. Whereas I think the further we get into the season and we dealing with injuries, those types of things change. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can approach that. But I love a lot of receivers at a lot of different price points.
Well, speaking of receivers, we have some breaking news. This is absolutely real. And I want to give credit to the person who I think said it first in our chat, at least. Jordan Dykes breaking the news on Fantasy Football Today DFS that our Meg and my Washington Commanders, this is shocking to me, to be honest.
I'm stunned.
Traded Jahan Dotson for a 5th round pick to, of all teams,
the Eagles,
the eventual winners of the NFC East this year. I hate to say it, but they get better with Jahan Dotson. I mean, wow. I'm
stunned. I'm stunned.
He's only in his 3rd year. He goes back to Pennsylvania. Of course, I believe he played at Penn State. Of course, he did play at Penn State. Your reaction? This is shocking.
I have a mouth open, so stunned, absolutely stunned. I know it seems like the coaches had soured on him. We're not impressed with him. There was clearly a lot of talk about looking for that, second receiver option to step up. I just thought that was a lot of just camp noise, and I honestly thought they were working him to try to see if he could just play that slot role for Washington. I'm stunned. And then to only get a fit, I mean, he's on his rookie deal, only get a fifth round back. I'm a little confused. Was there something going on in the, this doesn't add up to me. I don't love it.
I don't want to speculate because there's nothing to speculate on, but this seems like there's more to this story than we know.
Yes.
Because I don't listen. I mean, he's in his third year. He hasn't exactly spiked, but he also hasn't been with a great quarterback or under the right regime necessarily. We know he's talented from Penn State. That is,
I'm
clip
stunned.
that reaction. Clip that reaction real time. Apex Fuzzy says that's actually a great idea. Though Meg's face. I wasn't even looking at it because I was so stunned myself.
I don't hide.
Looking
I have
into
no
the
poker.
Camera.
No poker face. This girl, no poker face.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me though is I'm looking at Washington's depth chart at receiver, and I'm like, well, who exactly is emerging? I mean, Luke McCaffrey can't be ready for that role. De'Ami Brown is he all of a sudden going to be like De'Ami Brown's talented, but is he going to be that guy that's going to take that role? Like Jamison Crowder's on this team. He's like, I don't know how old he is, probably 35 at this point. Dax Milne is Olamide Zaccheaus is on this team, who's not like, he's from UVA kid with the Atlanta, but not hyper talented. What is going on here? I'm very confused.
I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. There, like you said, there must be more to this story, because you don't get rid of when a guy's on a rookie contract, I just don't understand why you trade him for just a 5th round pick. We didn't get a player back.
So I think Nada's clarifying here. He says it's Dotson and a 5th for a 2025 3rd rounder and 2 7th round picks. Okay. So I
can never understand the math on that. So I'm trying to figure that out.
So that makes a little bit more sense, because we're going to give them a 5th, but we're going to get a 3rd rounder in return and 2 7th round picks. So the 2 7th round picks, that's kind of like whatever. But the 2025 3rd rounder next year, like that's a high impact player.
You're getting a day 2 player. Yeah. Right. Sure. I'm still surprised. I'm stunned. Yeah. And to the Eagles too.
To the Eagles. I think the Eagles are loaded. I'm going to be going on HQ later today. I'm going to give out a few picks. Some NFL related, some MLB. I like a preseason play. I'll just give it out right here. I like the Colts tonight -3.5 in the first half. It's a first half spread because the real full line is 6.5. I have my reasons. We're going to be playing, or Colts are going to be playing the starters for about a quarter and a half, most likely. That means Anthony Richardson, both sides of the ball, whatever. Bengals aren't playing their starters. Their backup is injured. So it could be a good opportunity for the Colts to get right, because they haven't looked good at the joint practices against the Bengals. So just throwing that out there. Nada says, we will be clipping that. Trust. It's too bad I got the round person wrong, like the info wrong on the 5th round thing, but close enough.
I can never hide my reaction. So yeah, that's done. That shocked me. Wow. Okay.
Okay, so before we move on to tight end, that definitely sidetracked us a little bit. So who do we draft for Washington? Yeah, Terry McLaurin would certainly be that guy.
I mean, to mention in the best ball streets, if you want to take, he's been basically undrafted, but you could draft De'Ami Brown in the 18th round of best ball drafts. He will now be drafted, I'm guessing. People have been taking shots on Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey obviously now has a quicker path to have a role. So I have a little bit. I have like 6% Luke McCaffrey. Maybe take some shots there, but it doesn't seem like they've gotten him involved with starters at all this preseason. So that might take a little more time, but maybe by the end of the season he gets there. So maybe some McCaffrey, but it sounds like the team must be higher on De'Ami Brown than we are. So
I would imagine so. MV Prof Professor says, why would they do this to Jayden? Oh, that is fantastic. Okay, let's see. Any other receivers before we get to a quick discussion on a few tight ends? I had Deontay Johnson down there. I think he popped up with a small injury. We'll have to monitor that. I think Deontay Johnson's getting, assuming he's healthy for week 1, probably undersold a little bit. We know how, listen, Dave, we got a new quarterback whisperer for the Carolina Panthers, but also we know that Bryce likes to lock into his number 1, 5,300. This guy could have 9 catches for a week.
Right. Absolutely. No, I like that. 2 others I wanted to mention. I talked about Herbert, and I was waiting to see the news on his injury, but he's back practicing. I like both of Herbert's receivers are both very reasonably priced, and that would be obviously Josh Palmer and potentially Lad McConkey if we feel like he's definitely going to have that a starting role, which I believe he should. So we need to make sure of that. But those two Chargers receivers, and then, I would say some cheaper ones. You mentioned Michael Wilson, also mentioned Darnell Mooney. Falcons, again, now with Kirk Cousins, if you don't want to pay up for Drake London, you could pay down for Mooney as the wide receiver 2 in Atlanta. I know obviously Pitts is going to be garnering a lot of targets as well. And then I've got a super deep sleeper. We got to see if he's starting week 1. Need to make sure there's no Ayuk news. As long as there's no Ayuk news that's breaking right now.
Yes. Wait a minute. Is that it? Maybe Brandon Ayuk.
I hope not.
I'm breaking this.
Are you? Do you want? Do you want?
Brandon Ayuk is going to get traded to the Washington Commanders. That's the only explanation for shipping off
that actually did run
Dotson. And no, I'm not comparing those two players. Don't do that to me. But I'm just saying I can't figure out why they would do this, ladies and gentlemen. Brandon Ayuk is coming to play with his friend Jayden Daniels. I'm breaking it right now, folks.
Is it? Can I ask you? Do you want that?
Yes. And the reason is, even though I don't like to pay high prices for perimeter players necessarily, I want to take care of the interiors first, offensive line in particular, and defensive line, which we're okay at. I think when you have a quarterback that's a rookie, I think he needs to be able to rely on multiple targets. And if you have Terry McLaurin, and let's see what happens with Synod and Zach Ertz, but if you have Terry McLaurin, a pass-catching Austin Eckler, and a Brandon Ayuk, I think that makes the Jayden Daniels experience a lot better in spite of a lack of an offensive line.
Yeah, so. I just wanted to get your take as a Washington fan. Sorry. I didn't mean to flip it and ask you the questions. I was just curious.
No, I'm just hoping that I'm right. There's probably like a 6% chance I'm right. But again, you trade him into like all of this smells like this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially trading him in division. Something else must be afoot here. And it's perhaps the foot, if not the feet, of one Brandon Ayuk. I love this call. I'm rolling with it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get to some stock up tight ends and maybe a couple stock down guys before we get out of here. But first, one quick message from our partners. Jay Met says, I can't believe this trade and why the Eagles. Everyone hates the Eagles. Unless you're an Eagles fan, that's probably true, Jay Metz. All right. Again, I think they win the NFC East somewhat comfortably. I like what this defense has put together in the offseason in particular, like the new DC. And I certainly think this offense is absolutely incredible with everybody seeming to be healthy. No Jason Kelce at center, but you got Saquon Barkley back there too. Yeah. And John Dotson's going to get on the field as I assume the third receiver. Mm-hmm. That's not nothing. You got Dallas Goedert on that team. Like there's just too many weapons. Jalen Hurts can run. Like I'm not 100% sure how you stop this team from winning the NFC East at like minus 120. That's value to me. All right, some tight ends.
Now before we get to tight ends, I am obsessed. All I can think about when I get off the show for the people that are playing best ball is when these kind of things happen, if Ayuk were to move, now Dotson moves. Now I need to look up how many Hurts, because we talk about stacking in best ball, how many Hurts Dotson teams I got accidentally. So that's the first thing I'm going to do after the show.
It's both the beauty and the tragedy of best ball, right?
Yes,
because things can happen, injuries, trades.
My Daniels Dotson, those stacks are done. But did I accidentally get a Hurts Dotson? Well, so we'll see. Anybody who plays best ball will understand that obsession that I will check after the show. So.
Last thing on receiver, Jay Metz asks, what do we expect from Keenan Allen this year? So last week I was on CBS Sports Network and I gave out a prop that I liked, and it was Keenan Allen's under receiving yards of 775.5. Let's keep in mind that he's 32 years old. He seems to be out of shape, and that Rome Odunze is, in my opinion, the better receiver than Keenan Allen already. I think Rome Odunze is unbelievable, and I think we're going to find that out in the first few years of his career, that he is one of the best receivers in the league. And when you take him and you take Keenan Allen's age and the fact that he's slightly out of shape and that it looks like the connection between Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze has already matured, I love Keenan Allen unders. I'm not playing him in DFS in any situation unless I find out real quick that my take is completely wrong. I think DJ Moore is a great DFS consideration early in the season. I think he could have some huge games, but I expect Rome Odunze to maybe sort of take over that wide receiver 2 role earlier rather than later. So it's just something to think about there. Good question, Jay Metz. Tight end, Trey McBride, somebody I like not breaking any news here. Everybody likes Trey McBride. I like him week 1 at 6,100, even though he's the highest priced tight end. Maybe that keeps people off of him a little bit because the Bills have rated out pretty good against tight ends. But don't forget, secondary's revamped. Matt Milano's not going to be playing. Dalton Kincaid will be a popular option to stack or not stack with Josh Allen. So Trey McBride's a guy that I'm looking to play. Debro had mentioned Hunter Henry. He's 4,200, a pay down option. Any other tight ends, or do you like any of those tight ends, whether, it's week 1 or going into the early part of the season?
I like the tight ends, like you said, stock up for the early part of the season. I think the Bills are going to be hard to know who to stack with Josh Allen. And of course, as a rushing quarterback, we don't need to overstack that situation. But Kincaid's going to be the one that I lean to stacking with Josh Allen the most because of the familiarity, and Shakir. But Kincaid, you mentioned, I love that. It's just based on week 1. It's likely going to be hard based on everything I said at receiver for me to pay up at tight end. But I do love Kincaid and I do love McBride. So I will say that. But I like the Debro call of Hunter Henry. And, Kyle Pitts goes in the 5th round of best ball drafts, but is only priced, in the 4Ks here in week 1. What I think that's going to mean is he's going to be incredibly high owned likely, but that price is a really nice price for Kyle Pitts. I'll throw out 2 other options, and now this might even be more viable if they don't get an Ayuk or another receiver to Washington. Zach Ertz, another person that, the fantasy community gets grossed out by old players. And so I think people poo-poo Zach Ertz and then they like Ben Sinnott. I think early in the season, it's going to be Zach Ertz, and he's dirt cheap. A rookie quarterback's best friend is usually a tight end and a safety. And again, this horizontal air raid, getting the ball out quick. Who would that likely be? It could be Zach Ertz. And probably my favorite one, and it's this Dolphin. I just love Mike McDaniel in this Dolphins offense, and I want any piece of it I can. Well, one of the cheapest pieces is Jonnu Smith. And he's probably only going to be on the field in passing plays. He's not known to be a great blocker. But who cares? Because if he's on the field for passing plays, and I trust Mike McDaniel more than most coaches in this league to just utilize his weapons in the right way. So Jonnu Smith is my cheap play from an offense that I think could put up a ton of points week 1.
I like it. There was a comment from Apex Fuzzy who says, I waited on tight end and was forced to draft Cole Kmet. Not good. And I say that because I think Gerald Everett is going to get a pretty big role at tight end in this offense. So that's one of those situations where, honestly, Apex Fuzzy, I might, and I'm not saying Cole Kmet's not going to have a good game here and there, but if Gerald Everett is taking some targets away from him, and you already have 3 great receivers and a running back can catch some passes as well, that seems like a drop situation. See if anybody else is out there that might be a firm tight end one, something to think about there. T. Hill is a tight end sleeper. I assume you were talking about
Taysom.
Okay. That makes sense. Interesting take there. We'll see how that offense goes. Okay. I agree with everything you said about tight end. I think we can move on. Before we close the show, I want to talk about just a couple of players, a couple of teams where I'm kind of out on. Honestly, Kmet and Gerald Everett, that situation was one of the ones I was going to say because I don't exactly know what's going on there. And listen, we're not covering all the stock down here, but one stock down to me, and you mentioned Kyle Pitts at 4,100 in his price. I mean, it's against the Steelers defense, so I don't think he's going to be as popular as you think, but he's certainly a playmaker with Kirk Cousins. So I actually like that play. I don't think he's going to be hyper popular, again, because that Steelers defense speaks to people.
Sure.
But the Steelers offense does not. Stock down for me is whoever's the quarterback for the Steelers. Like Russell Wilson, I assume is going to be the quarterback. But what that really means is stock down for me on George Pickens, too. I understand has tremendous value. And we know Russ, if he's going to be the starter, he can buy some time. He can hit a guy deep. And I mentioned Najee Harris earlier. Am I just going to be out on this entire Steelers experience? I feel like I have to be. I don't even want to be contrarian with it because I don't think the ceiling is that high.
I mean, I will say in Arthur Smith offense, I do like the running backs. And so I probably am in on Najee, but I get the apprehension with the Steelers passing game and kind of wanting to see that. It seems like they got to get this offensive line together. It looked awful in that second preseason game. So hopefully they can get that patched together, and it can be because they do have some weapons that with Freiermuth, of course, Pickens. One of my sleepers that we got so excited talking about Ayuk was if Roman Wilson can come back, I actually think he could play the slot role. Now, He's been injured all of camp. I think he's supposed to play in this preseason, week 3 preseason game. We'll see. But if they don't get Ayuk, they need a second receiver to step up. And if Roman Wilson could step up, maybe it's not week 1, but early in the season, that might be worth a shot. But I get your stock down on the Steelers offense because that offensive line looks rough. The quarterback situation looks, pretty bad right now. So that's definitely a wait and see, but I'm kind of still in on the running back situation for the Steelers.
Yeah, fair enough. Another running back I want to talk about, and for the record, Hayden09, you must have joined us late. You said, what do you guys think of Trey McBride? We talked about that about 5 minutes ago. Big fan. I could see myself stacking Kyler Murray, maybe even in a single stack situation with Trey McBride, 6,400 to 6,100, and running it back, maybe not with a receiver like a Khalil Shakir or a Keon Coleman, but actually maybe with James Cook, and then just moving on to another game. So that's something I'm considering. I just love the Trey McBride volume. And then when you talk about Matt Milano being injured probably for this entire year with a torn bicep, I think Trey McBride's just going to be such a target monster all year, but specifically in this game, which has a high total as well. So good question. By the way, Hayden09, if you're new to this show, Dan Marino's in the chat. Dan's new to the show. I don't think he's ever watched it before. Apex Fuzzy, you might be new to the chat and to the show. Please subscribe to the show on Spotify or Apple and give us a review if you like the show. Again, this show will feature not just us two, but Mike McClure as well when we're doing our game-by-game previews every single week. You just type in the search Fantasy Football Today DFS. You'll find our show. Hit subscribe. It's that easy. If you want to review it, that's great. If you don't, that's cool too, but it takes 2 seconds to hit 5 stars. You can make some comments there if you want as well. Devin Achane. I want to ask you about him because he's a guy that in people's minds is like, this guy can pop. He can win your fantasy week. He can win your DFS slate. But I mean, stock down, I'm not so sure I trust the touches versus Raheem Mostert or maybe somebody else that comes in. Your thoughts on Devin Achane? Do we jump early because of the unknown? Or are we like, nah, I'm not into this because I'm pretty sure he's getting a split at best with Raheem Mostert.
It really is tough in DFS. In best ball, you can, let it play out. And even though he's a 3rd round pick, you can let it play out. In DFS, it is really tough to know. Obviously Mostert had just an historical amount of touchdowns last year, and that could happen again. And he was getting work with the ones. Now, I will say they were in week 2. It looked like they were creative in splitting Devin Achane out wide. So he could become like really more of the pass catcher, which on DraftKings in a PPR format could be pretty valuable. So, that was interesting and intrigued me. I get what you're saying. It's a high price to pay for a guy in a split, but we know how powerful he can be with his touches and explosive he can be with his touches. So I wouldn't say I'm fully stocked down on him. I would say I'm cautious about it. I don't know how much I will get to him week 1 just because of the price in a timeshare situation, but I may want a little because we know just how explosive he can be.
And that's the thing. Josh Lucero and Dan Marino. I can't believe Dan's joining the show. That's fantastic. They're talking about the efficiency of Devin Achane. And I'm not disagreeing with the efficiency. You got to be really efficient if you're only going to get 10 carries. You got to explode for at least one long run, which we understand he can do. But, Raheem Mostert, he's just got the respect of Mike McDaniel and the locker room, apparently. He's up there now. I haven't checked his age. He's got to be 32 at this point. But
somewhere around there. Yeah.
He's got wheels. You think Devin Achane's fast, he is. But Raheem Mostert's fast, too. These guys, when they get in space, they can launch one. So this is one of those where with Nico Collins, I think I'm willing to sort of play the unknown and be like, I'm making my stand. Mm-hmm. But with Devin Achane and the Dolphins in particular in the running game, because Jalen Wright's a guy on this offense too, I just don't think I'm willing to take that leap. I'd rather just pay up for Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, maybe a mini stack with a Christian Kirk or maybe even an Evan Ingram, who we didn't bring up in the tight end conversation. I think that might be the way I play at least week 1. I don't have a lot of other stock down guys. I mentioned Curtis Samuel. He was mentioned in the chat. He's got turf toe. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a bump up to guys like Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid. There was a question about Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers. I think Brock Bowers does have a foot injury that we do need to monitor. But I don't think if they're both healthy, I don't think Meyer's going to get in the way of Brock Bowers. They invested a lot in him in terms of draft equity. It's going to be the Brock Bowers show with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I worry about Devontae Adams' value. That's something to consider, especially with Minshew at quarterback as opposed to Aiden O'Connell. But I think Bowers is going to be featured. Not a guy I'm super interested in playing early in the year, however. Anybody else that comes to mind, stock down, or somebody we missed on stock up before we get out of here, Meg?
I think we covered most of it. I'm sure there are some guys that I'm more out on to start the season, or like you said, want to wait and see it first. But no, I think we covered it pretty well, and I'm just so excited to get into these week one streets.
Yeah, Jordan Dykes, I am too. Jordan Dykes, does Trey Benson have a path to being RB1 with Connor, or is it still Connor all the way in Arizona? So it's interesting. You're shaking your head no. I mean, he's certainly not had a great preseason, but I think he probably has talent. If Connor goes down, do you think it's Trey Benson's job? And have you drafted him in best ball?
I have not drafted in best ball. I typically am a little more wary of these running backs that only have contingent value. I like targeting the running backs that have some standalone value, like these 1B type running backs, as opposed to these guys that are really only going to get a workload. And that's how I personally view Trey Benson at this time. I think he's only contingent value if Connor goes down. I think Connor is still the bell cow. There's been a lot of good coach speak about James Conner, even though he's getting up there, 29, 30, whatever age he's at. He is still, the bell cow, the RB1, and been impressing the coaches. So I've been drafting a lot of James Conner.
One last question for you. Dan Marino says, Kincaid is going to be the #1 target for Josh Allen. It's an interesting comment, and it might be true. Do you think that's true with so much? I mean, none of these receivers, I think Keon Coleman could be good. I don't know that he's going to be a target monster year one. I don't think Khalil Shakir is necessarily going to be a target monster. I don't think that's his role in his, what is this, his second year now? Maybe it's his third. Is it Kincaid by default?
I do. I believe so. Yes. I think we saw in preseason from the usage notes, I thought it seemed like Keon Coleman was getting 100% of the snaps, but it's not like he was getting some huge target share. And this is just preseason, but I think that might take some time for him to develop as a rookie to garner more targets. I think Shakir and Kincaid are the guys that Josh Allen is most comfortable with. So those are going to be the guys that I probably lean on early in the season. Those are the guys that he previously worked with. And I think Kincaid could play a similar Travis Kelce-like role where our receivers, we don't really have an alpha receiver. So we're going to have like an alpha tight end as our top target.
And if you watched him play in college and for most of last year, he can absolutely be that guy. MV Prop says out-targeted Diggs at the end of the year, certainly. All right. Well, Meg, what's funny is 55 minutes have passed, actually 57, and we were just having a conversation. That was fun. That wasn't like a highly structured show, although we did go through like position by position, but we could have gone, honestly, for 3 hours.
Right.
And totally. I wouldn't have thought much of it, the fact that 3 hours had passed. And that's what you're going to get on the show. But believe me, when we get to our game by game preview, it's actually going to be quite structured. What we do on that show, for those of you that are new, Henry L., you look new to me. Jeff Sternberg, I know you're not new. Thanks for being in here. And the Prof, you might be new, so you might not know this. We go game by game on the main slate. So we'll have that Thursday 11 o'clock show. It'll be me, Meg, and Mike McClure. We'll go game by game with the games that we like, the players we like in that game, the stacks that we like in that game, our little cheat sheet where we kind of tell you where we're putting a lot of our resources in terms of stacks and fades, chalk plays we're actually buying into, the non-chalk plays we're buying into, things of that nature. So it's going to be a pretty structured show, but it's going to be a ton of information. And we're going to try to do it, Meg, in like with the three of us, we're going to try to do those Thursday 11 o'clock shows in like the 45 to 50, 55 minute tops range. That's a lot of information for your Sunday slate heading into the Sunday slate. So please keep that in mind. It's going to be a great show. Make sure you subscribe to this channel on YouTube, of course, but also to our podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you enjoy your podcast. Meg, we're 14 days away from an NFL kickoff. Give us some final thoughts this week. We'll be back next week.
Again, just talking NFL with you makes me very happy. 14-day countdown makes me happy. I'm already building week one show lineups. That makes me happy. Seeing all these people in chat, thrilled. This has been a great time, and look forward to seeing you and all these people in chat very soon here on Thursdays.
So I haven't asked this question yet, and so I'm going to ask you one more question before we get out of here. Apex Fuzzy says, Texans versus Eagles in the Super Bowl. Interesting. It's possible. I'm going to ask you for your Super Bowl matchup.
Ooh, I'm going to go chalk on the NFC side and go 49ers.
Okay.
Running it back. And but not chalky on the AFC. You know, Aaron Rodgers. I know you have the Jets pick for the AFCs.
Yeah.
Don't mess with a scorned Aaron Rodgers. You know, so I'm going to go Jets 49ers. Isn't that the Monday night kickoff? I believe that's the Monday.
It is. In fact, to your point, that line, and I'm pretty sure that line opened at 6. And it might be down to like 5.5. I'm not 100% sure. I'm buying time so I can actually verify what the line is. But I like the Jets in that one. So it's 4. Oh, it's 4.5 now. Okay, people got wise. When that line came out, it was like 6, and then it went down to 5.5. And I'm like, that's way too many points. Like that's ridiculous.
Right.
Now it's 4.5. So that makes a ton of sense. Hopefully you got that when I suggested it. That was like a month ago. But I don't mind the Jets. And if Aaron Rodgers is 65% from a physical fitness standpoint of the quarterback that he was pre-Achilles, it's what he does pre-snap to the defense, much like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. That's where you're getting most of the value at this point of Aaron Rodgers' career. So if he can move around even just a little bit and he looks like kind of okay there, this defense, they've got weapons in the backfield and at the receiver position. I don't hate your call at all. I think 20-1 for them to win the Super Bowl is actually a pretty good number. I'll throw that out there.
Yeah.
I think that number is going to get shorter. But my Super Bowl is going to be Detroit Lions revenge narrative. They should have beaten I picked the Niners the last 2 years to win the Super Bowl.
Okay,
I think they have a good
too.
shot. But I'm gonna go with the Detroit Lions against, I gotta say it, the Kansas City Chiefs. But I think the Lions will actually win the game. I think they have reinforced their secondary and their defensive line. They picked up a couple of guys. I think they've got enough with Ben Johnson coming back to eclipse everybody in this league. So at 12-1, I kind of like that, but I am not out on the Jets. I like them to win the AFC East at plus 240. It's now down to plus 170. And I think they have a shot to make the Super Bowl and even win it at 20-1. All right. We took way too much of your time, but it was so fun. I had to ask that final question. Apex Fuzzy, thanks for being in here and asking the good questions. Meg, I think we're going to do this again next week, but buckle up because we're going to do our game-by-game preview as we approach the actual Week 1 slate. And we're even going to give you some stuff for that showdown game. Hopefully, DraftKings and maybe FanDuel will come out with a 2-game slate because we have the Thursday game,
Friday.
of course, but then we have the Friday game in Brazil. So I'm hoping they do the 2-game slate because that'll be a lot more enjoyable for me. Either way, we'll make sure we have stuff breaking down that stuff as well. But you got to be subscribed to the channel and to the podcast to know that it's coming. Thanks for being in here. We'll see you next time on Fantasy Football Today, DFS.